That's wonderful. I'm so excited to be here, and it's so lovely of you, all of you, to come to hear this old artist in his twilight years. Twilight years. I flew in this morning from Victoria, and I brought this bag with the props that I'm going to use for this little talk. I had a bit of trouble because when I got to them to weigh it, they said it's much too heavy for cabin luggage. And they said, what is so heavy in there? I said, there's an essential thing that I need for my talk. It's a 500 million year old fossil rock. And I'm going to talk about that a bit later. In fact, I'm going to do some rubbings and things with it. And then I bought various things as my props. Wait a minute, I mustn't run around too much because you're filming it, aren't I? And among other things, I bought this incredibly boring talk. Which is the right way up, thank God. It's. I hope it's not going to be too long for you. And so without more ado, I'm going to tell you about my last 3 years, which have been one long, marvelous adventure. For the last 4 years, I've been having an El Dorado of a time, investigating and painting the habitat and modes of dwelling and the architecture of desert animals and reptiles. It all started when John Keane and I visited one of the Australian Wildlife Conservation sanctuaries at Watakimpiri, New Haven, which is about 300 miles to the west of Alice Springs. I started to draw the different animals which had been returned to their ancestral country after it had been fenced to keep out the cats and foxes that had caused their demise. Greater Bilbies, there's one over there, Bettongs, marla, rufous hair wallabies, and golden bandicoots, and many more of the species which used to be all over Australia and which are now sadly reduced to dangerously low numbers. And each year I've taken my camper truck, I have it freighted from, I did, I'm hoping to do it in 3 weeks, freighted to Alice Springs, but I'm awfully worried whether the freight people will have the money. So when I was with John Keane, who wrote this wonderful book about the Papunya artists, I would often be walking across the country with him, actually holding a photograph of, say, Clifford Possum Jabberjali's amazing paintings. And one time I was carrying the painting which called Storm Men Meet Possums and Potato Men at Watakimpiri as a guide. So unbelievable it was. We were following the tracks in this painting. This isn't the actual painting, but it's one by Clifford Possum of a ancestral possum track. So the unbelievable thing is that we were following the tracks in the painting of a possum ancestor and came across the tracks of one of the actual possums which had only in the last year been released by the Australian Wildlife Conservancy. Can you imagine? So there's these tracks, and there used to be, of course, masses of them there. Now, you may have seen quite a lot about me in the film in there. Some of you have seen the film. So I'd like to waffle on about the making of these paintings, which are around us. So I thought I'd dive in straight away and talk about the paintings of the great desert skink. I've got to be very careful. When you're a film actor, you just can't wander around too much, can you? So this one here is called Great Desert Skink Commune with Basking Mounds, Birthing Pool, and the Defecatorium. Now this animal, which is a big rainbow-coloured lizard, is completely amazing, and the numbers have gone down because of the cats, foxes, and so there's very few left. But the AWC has been doing some marvelous things about increasing the numbers, and that was partly because of the huge fence that they put there. I'd have me a camp there, and I'd be sitting, drawing the actual underground. I've been sort of being helped by some wonderful scientists. In fact, Danae Moore, who is one of the great experts, she showed me how these lizards have communal dwellings, so there'd be about 30 of them, and they all have, you look over there and there's a burrow, and then there's another burrow, and there's another burrow, and then you find that they all share the same latrine. I didn't call it latrine in the title because I thought that perhaps people wouldn't buy a painting of a lizard latrine, but actually perhaps the defecatorium is even worse, isn't it? And then they have the marvelous basking mound, which they've constructed, which is ever so big, and they all lie there. And so those paintings, the orangey ones through there, are all of that kind of basking mound. And then the other completely amazing thing, which I was shown by the wonderful Wolseley elder Alice Nampy-Dimper, that they wait for the rains, and then they go to where there is those. Have you seen those wonderful termite mounds, which are actually the top of a giant termite mound, which is going into the ground? And so here is one I hinted at. And when it rains, there's a tiny, very small lens of water, and that's where they have that is their birthing pool. I have actually down here got a whole lot about Heidegger and his ideas of dwelling, but I'm not going to bore you with that. But if you look at my website, johnwolseley.com, in a few weeks' time, I'm going to print this nonsense, And I'm actually going to have some of my slightly wonky discussion of Heidegger, who I'm very fond of. Now, here we are. Now, I'm going to jump that bit. I'm going to talk to you just a tiny bit about the Australian Wildlife Conservancy, because they are so amazing, and I wouldn't have been able to do any of this unless I'd been, they'd show me so much of it. And so I've just written this here, which I'm copied out what they've said. The AWC manages a network of sanctuaries and protected areas around Australia with a practical approach informed by science. Their field teams and ecologists work in iconic landscapes, which a lot of you have been to, in the Kimberley, the top end in Cape York. And they tackle the weeds and the feral animals, and then they have amazing fire regimes and monitoring systems. And for those of you who've been to the one at New Haven, it is completely amazing. You look across the fence between they fenced out the cats and the foxes and the feral predators, and then on that side it's a pretty barren, dumbed-down landscape, which is true of so much of the Great Sandy Desert and the Tanami Desert. And then on that side, it's fecund and exciting, and there's just masses more vegetation. And that's because once the burrowing Bettongs come in, and all these other animals, they are, well, especially the burrowing Bettongs, they are the earth engineers that turn the soil over, and they also bring in, they get roots and tubers and things, and I always want to act out this. I mean, I want to act out what a burrowing Bettong does, but it's not very good when you're trying to be a film star as well. So they dig this thing up and they take it away over there, and it has its mycorrhizal fungus. So they're actually spreading the mycorrhizal fungus, which is, as you know, so important. Now, in this exhibition, there is also a series of paintings about leaf-tailed geckos. How many of you have seen a leaf-tailed gecko? Oh, there's a lot of leaf-tailed. Perhaps some of you are leaf-tailed geckos. So that's another species which have been looked after by in the New South Wales sanctuaries. And I first drew one with a wonderful name, Lucy's leaf-tailed gecko, 30 years ago in a New England rainforest. And in the painting, mimesis leaf-tailed geckos on bark, moss and lichen. There are a number, which is that one over there, and then there's another one. There's another leaf-tailed gecko one. There are a number of heavily camouflaged leafies. These geckos are famous for their flat bodies and leaf-shaped tails and the way they blend seamlessly into their surroundings. I first saw one 35 years ago in a national park up towards the Queensland border, and I was in this wonderful dense rainforest, and there was a tree with the most beautiful bark, and I went up to it, and one of the bits of bark went like that. And then I looked a bit to there, and same thing was happening. And because I was a new person, I only arrived in Australia in 1976, and I'd only just arrived. I just put my hand out to look at a bit of bark, and of course it was the tail of a leafy, and as you know, lizards do that so that a predator, I've got a meal, and they drop their tails. You probably know about this, and then they grow a new one. I put the blotches of lichen or moss, which is in that painting, move seamlessly over the surfaces of the tree trunk and the gecko's skin. These geckos are such an integral part of their home, an integral part of their architecture. They're so camouflaged that from a distance, lizard and habitat are all one. These leafies hide in plain sight, while the burrowing bettongs hide within their architecture. I've been wandering over the banded landscapes of the Alice Springs orogeny. Do you know about the Alice Springs orogeny? I always think that word's rather rude. I don't know what. It's, when you are in one or two places on the MacDonnell Ranges and you look across west, what you're doing is similar to what you do you remember when you look down into the Grand Canyon? And do you remember that in the Grand Canyon, right down the bottom, there are the first, there is the first life, there is these rocks. Then are they stromatolites? What? Yes. I always get it muddled. And they are the very first life. They were a kind of mat of bacteria and things which actually did the first photosynthesis. This is when we were all in the water. And I've been making rubbings and painting layers of latex over these fossiliferous rocks. Then I've been making prints from these molds on Gampi paper. So some of you will know about latex. It's magic, and so this is a separate rock, but with this one, for instance, what I did was I painted 5 layers of latex on that, and it's actually something terribly sexy and attractive about when you peel it off. It's so lovely. And then what I do is I paste it down like that, and then I do frottage, or I print from them. So all these paintings, yes, let's go back to your walking west, and it's as if the Grand Canyon, the Alice Springs orogeny, is as if the Grand Canyon is tipped on its side. And so for 10 kilometers, you start off and looking at the rocks, and you see that they have forms, and then you find the first bivalves, and something like this, and then you go along and you go a bit further along, and if you're really very clever, you will do what a famous paleontologist paleontologists did, which was you'll find the first fish that was your ancestor, which looked above at the dry land and learnt to breathe. You know, like mud skippers do. And they none of you look like it, but they are our first ancestors. So on this walk, so what I'm doing, in fact, I'm going back again. I'm going back again to do a whole series about this. On this walk, you walk through, and then you see that they are all sort of. Well, I think what I wrote here in the series, Walk Across Geological Strata, Proterozoic to Late Cambrian, each step 1,000,000 years, I have collaged these prints onto the images of rocks in the painting. In the gaps between, I've made nature prints of some of the reclining plants. So they are also prints. In this way, I'm making a painting in which the land is printing itself. As I was doing this, I realized I was again documenting the architecture of the ancestors. Are you getting my good side? The architecture of the ancestors of these amazing animals, these bilbies, bettongs and skinks, which I've spent so much time drawing in the last years. I was finding that these ancestral creatures, now in fossil form, are still part of the landscape, their forms turned to stone. Now, oh my God, we got onto Heidegger. I think I go back. I'm going to go back a bit. Yes, that's it. And now I'm going to. Oh no! I have now got to take you to. None of you are as old. Oh no! I was a student at Atelier 17, the wonderful print workshop in Paris, which was started by S.W. Hayter. And he was an incredible man. He printed for a lot of these surrealists. And this is I'm allowed, aren't I, to wander off. So I've stuck to topic, haven't I? Stuck to topic. And quite often, some of those surrealist artists would come in. And one day he said to me, I'd like you to help me, because I've got a Spanish friend coming in to do some prints, and would you act as his assistant? And so I said, yes, that'd be lovely. And then he came in as charming, short, very charming, very humble surrealist. And I was a bit stupid. I didn't realize it was actually Miro. And then another time, the famous chap, the German sculptor, Hubertus von Pilgrim, who is one of my fellows, he said, that man who's just come in, I think that might be Max Ernst. And so we all sort of went up to the door, and sure enough, it was Max Ernst talking to Bill Hayter about how he started doing, or sort of invented, frottage. And he which, as you know, well, in fact, I'll dive down to that, because, as you know, This is where I'm going to do my demonstration. He was once in a hotel in Normandy by the sea, and he looked out over his bed, and there was some floorboards which are 300 years old. It had been scrubbed for 300 years or so, and he suddenly thought, "Oh, I've got a bit of graphite in my I've got a bit of graphite on my in my knapsack," and so this is the demonstration for the and he happened to have a bit of rare Japanese paper, Gampi or something like that, and he got out of bed. He was describing this to Hayter as we were all. He got out of bed and he got his stick of that. I mean, all you know about frottards, don't you? Yes. Well, and now it's got a slightly more rude connotation, but for a long time it was, because the word came from the French word frotter, and as you know, down the years, the people who had their falcons and their horses and their dogs and did hunting and things, they were very good at stroking. So a horse whisperer like Robert Redford, do you remember him in that film? He was an expert horse whisperer or frotterer. And so to cut a long story short, I make a lot of my paintings now by just doing just that, or else I'm actually inking them up, inking up the actual rocks, so that one like this is actually inked up with Gampi paper or some lovely Japanese paper. And then, when I've done that, I do these exquisite nature drawings, traditional, watching the other plants and what's happening. And first of all, about 30 years ago, I saw this wonderful plant, Leptosema chambersii, which Charles Darwin has organized, that it has its leaves on next to the sand. And the reason it does that is that so all birds can suck the honey out of it and pollinate them. And so when I've been drawing this, say when I was doing this one, I did something which might be new to science. I found something, unfortunately I can see one or two scientists in the audience, so and they would be saying that's absolute bullshit. But what happened? Oh no, I'll tell you how it happened. Alice, this wonderful Wolseley elder, was showing me all the different tracks. And here we were, actually here, and she showed me that some of the tracks were these different things like a yellow-throated myna, but some of them were little animals. And Then the next day, in the evening, then this marvellous thing called a brush-tailed mulgara came galloping along, and so this is meant to be a study of all the tracks and the footprints of all the different animals which are which pollinate the things. And in fact, here is a track here, and I said to Alice, "This is a strange-looking track," and she said, "Oh, that one. You'll see her in the film. She's talking about it. That one, that's a love track. That's a love track." She said, "Love track." I said, "What do you mean a love track?" And she said, "Over there is where the mulgara, that mulgara lives. And what it does, it spends half the night sitting outside its hole, and when it sees a female mulgara, it rushes off, drags it, is politically incredibly incorrect, it drags the female back into its hole." Did you catch that piece of acting? In fact, it's rather shocking. But then she says there's a lot of tracks around. And now I'm just going to see here what other nonsense I've forgotten. Oh yes, and on the desk over there, you will see some literature and donation cards from the AWC. So do pick them up and perhaps give a donation to this amazing thing, because it's just so important. And now I might end with talking again about the magic of doing work on top, in the very same area as all these paintings are done. And I put here something like in this book. I'm just trying to sell my friend's book. Dot, circle, and frame: the making of Papunya Tula art. He writes. Well, in fact, he's writing now a book which is going to be about the relationship between these amazing people who are bringing back the country and all these artists. And I've written here, you will all know about the importance of the painters of this region, how Robert Hughes described it as the last great world art movement. It is just so important. I actually think that these paintings are by far the most powerful and visionary works about land done in this country. And so to be walking across it and realizing that it is the same great patch of land which has been nurtured and restored and conserved with its fauna and flora by this wonderful AWC is mind-blowing. I put here, in this desperate and gloomy world, here is a stunning good news story. So I think perhaps we should we have a few questions, you think?
was just wondering about the rice paste that you use to layer your tissue on there. It's the Japanese technique. Have you ever had any issues with the rice paper coming off, the tissue paper coming off?
No, because the traditional way of using rice paste, if you do it correctly, is so marvelous, isn't it? And the good thing about it is that you avoid the situation which happened to me about 40 years ago, when somebody said that they'd met the chief conservator of the National Gallery, of your National Gallery, who said that artist, John Wolseley, his work, it's a conservatorial nightmare. And then that's really because I was using a lot of acrylic glues and things like that. And so in answer to your question, when I actually met him and he said, again, you're a conservatorial nightmare, he said, it's good to use rice paste, yes. I do sometimes, but actually it always happens in these sort of talks, doesn't it? You suddenly realize that there's some awful weak spot in your practice, and that is that somebody might be able to help me. When I haven't made my own, I go and get it in those green tubes. Do you know the ones? In all the art shops. They're made in Japan. And I have not actually I'm not completely sure whether they are as good as me when you make it on your own. Yeah. Hello.
John, hi. Thank you for your wonderful talk and just glorious work helping us all connect to nature. I was just wondering, when watching the film and seeing you crawling along the land and into the burrows, trying to embody the lives of other species, I'm just wondering, how do you feel?
How do I what?
How do you feel when you're doing that?
Especially when I was making that film, which was made by Leonie Van Eyck and also Iria Cohen up in the Northern Territory. I really do start to... I know what I'll go back to. I'll go back to the most wonderful book by... now, who is the great early behavioralist? Jacob von Uxel. I remembered his name. Oh, God. This is the most wonderful book. It's called something like Forays into the Life Worlds of Animals. And in that book, he says that the scientist and the artist must try and get into the life world, or he uses this word Umwelt, of that particular animal. You know the way with our dogs, sometimes we suddenly get into how they see the world. So in answer to your question, when I've been walking along on all fours, and especially disguised, I do start getting into the sense of what it might be like to see the world in that way. But for the film, I liked the idea that it was a kind of metaphor for how we artists who do paint wildlife are, and that is that we follow that thing that comes up in Taoist and Buddhist writing about artists, and that is when they say, in order to paint a cicada, you must draw and draw and draw it, and become a cicada. Something, and leaving behind your ego or something like that. And when I was drawing these birds, some of which I did see when I was crawling about like a bush-tailed mulgara, and I was thinking, oh, I'm a mulgara, and then the bird would come along there, and I suppose it's a metaphor for how we look when we draw. It's in some ways it's got the qualities of praying, and it's also got the qualities. Don't you drawers? Don't you find that you are also praising? John Ruskin somewhere said that all great art is praise. But I haven't put it quite the way he did. But so that's how I feel, I think. Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you, John. I know I'm not the only art teacher in the room. And so somebody who has the privilege of working with young people for many years now, your work is a continuing inspiration to them. And for us as teachers, it allows them to access ways in which they can create that is risk-taking, but also allows them to connect with the world around them and to notice the world around them in a way that you do. And that gives me great hope. And we all see your work as being hopeful that they too will connect with nature the way that you do.
Oh, thank you.
I can't resist asking what you were going to say about Heidegger.
You wanted what?
I wanted to hear what you were going to say about Heidegger.
Actually, I finished this in the hotel room looking down on Melbourne Airport with my copy of Steiner's wonderful book about him. And last night at 1 o'clock, I thought I'd written all this, but I hadn't got to the really good bit. And actually, as I got in the airplane, I thought, I've got to get back to the book. But shall I just say how this start, how it was going to start? But I'm keeping you up a bit, aren't I? I have to explain that there's 4 or 5 authors that I often talk about, and I have been criticized for talking about European theorists. It's pretty damn pompous. And why couldn't I talk about people from here a bit more? So I now I don't call him Heidegger, I call him Heidegger. So which is very appropriate for these Bettongs who Heidegger writes so beautifully about Van Gogh's painting of the old boots. Do you remember that one? That worn-out pair of boots, or was it shoes? He describes how Van Gogh makes us experience the thinginess, the integral reality of those old boots. So Van Gogh, I'm wandering off terribly now, aren't I? I'll get to Heidegger again. Van Gogh is communicating the absolute shoeness, the truth of being. Now, Heidegger is always talking about being and how we've lost actually being. We've even lost, he writes, the being of being. Now, then I ramble on, so I think I'll jump to another 3 sentences. Heidegger uses the word schöpfen to describe schöpfen, what a painter does when he creates a work of art. Schöpfen, as well as meaning to create in German, also means to draw from a well. Thus, an artist's work is a literal drawing up to the light from the well of being, which well is sunk in the guardian earth. And I'll have to stop now, but what I was going to be talking about is the wonderful way that Heidegger does actually talk about the role of us artists and scientists and so forth as guardians of the earth. And then I think oh yes, it might be here. no, but so that just gets me back to end by saying that this attempt to talk about animal architecture is to say that one way we can all do it, we artists can show the importance and the beauty of the world and act as guardians, is by showing it, by making paintings or sculptures or poems or music about it. So we are showing the marvelous intricacy and fragility of the world, and this makes me be able to end this pompous talk with a quote by John Cocteau. Certainly unlikely person to be talking about. So he said, now my French is pretty rusty. Art, science faite claire. Art is science made clear. And the lovely thing is that I know 5 or 6 scientists, and they often say, we are showing these wonderful things, like climate change or all these important things, but we're not very good at showing it, describing it to everyone else. And so it seems to me that thing, say, about art is science made clear, is a lovely example of how artists could and should show people how nature works and how important it is that we don't carry on this headlong fall into destroying it. Is that a suitably pompous ending?